One morning, as James waited to leave the big station, the Fat Controller came to see him. "I hope that you can give us a good run this morning, James," he said. "I have an important meeting to go to, and I don't want to be late. Do your best, won't you?" "Of course, sir," replied James. "We'll have you there in no time." "Well done," laughed the Fat Controller. "I know I can rely on you." On every passenger train, there is something called an emergency cord. If there is an emergency, it can be used to call the guard, and it automatically stops the train at the same time. But it must only be used in an emergency, otherwise the person who pulled it may have to pay a fine. On James's train today, there was a party of foreign holiday makers. They could not understand English very well, and thought that the chain above the door was for calling the buffet car attendant. So they pulled it. Suddenly the brakes came on hard, and James had to stop as quickly as he could. "Oh no," he groaned as he came to a standstill. "Now what?" "Emergency, James," said his driver, looking back. "Someone's pulled the cord." The guard walked along the train to find out what was wrong. The foreign visitors were pleased to see him, but the guard was not pleased when they asked him for 4 cups of coffee. The matter was soon cleared up, and the guard told James he could go. But when he tried to start, he found that he couldn't. The sudden action of the brakes had locked them solid, and James couldn't move an inch. What was worse, the train had stopped right across a level crossing, and by now there were long queues of cars on both sides waiting to get over the railway. James was overcome with embarrassment, but he couldn't do a thing about it. The Fat Controller came, and the motorists all told him what a nuisance the railway was. "I'm sorry, sir," said James sadly. "Not your fault, James," he replied, "but I don't know how I'm going to reach my meeting." James didn't either. Then a flash of colour in the traffic queue caught his eye. "Isn't that Bertie waiting?" he said. "Maybe he could turn around and—" In a flash, James's fireman was running down the road. A few minutes later he came back grinning broadly. "No problem, sir," he said to the Fat Controller. "He's trying to reach the same place as you. He says he'll be happy to take you when he's turned." It was another hour before a fitter came to mend his brakes, and longer still before James could get his train moving. He was very sorry, and so were the foreign visitors, but they promised not to make the same mistake again. James felt certain they wouldn't.
Bertie the Bus and his friends Thomas and Edward have lived on the island of Sodor for a very long time. "I could never climb hills well," Bertie would say, remembering the time he raced with Thomas. "But I'll keep going, never fear." "If you weren't red," laughed his driver, "I'd probably call you a golden oldie." One summer morning, Bertie set out on his favourite trip, the Farquhar Sunday School outing. He liked being full, but he liked being full of children best. "It makes a bus feel young again," he said cheerfully. The party was soon aboard, and Bertie purred away happily. They took the road towards the sea, but stopped in Sudbury, the island of Sodor's capital, to explore the cathedral and see the castle. Then, after a picnic lunch, they headed for the beach at Brendam, a few miles further on. Bertie enjoyed his run, but was glad of a rest in the coach park, while his driver joined the children and their teachers on the sand. But during the afternoon, one of the teachers began to feel unwell. She said nothing at first, but grew worse, and soon she could hide it no longer. By chance, one of the other teachers had been a nurse, and diagnosed the trouble at once. "She'll need to go to hospital," she told the vicar. "I'll telephone for an ambulance at once," he said, scrambling to his feet. "I've got a better idea," interrupted Bertie's driver. "There's a direct road to the hospital at Wellsworth from here, and Bertie could be there in no time. Much quicker than an ambulance could get here and back anyway." "But what about the children?" asked the vicar. "How will we get them home?" The bus driver looked at his watch. "Edward's train leaves at 5 o'clock. If you catch that, I'll meet you at Wellsworth with Bertie." The vicar telephoned the station, and they arranged for an extra coach to be added to the 5 o'clock train for the Sunday school outing. Edward was surprised to see the children waiting on the platform, but was pleased to help. The children piled happily into their special coach. A train ride was a bonus for the outing. Edward puffed off, and brought them to the junction in fine style. Greeted with a cheerful honk honk from Bertie, who was waiting for them in the yard. "Your teacher is quite comfortable," his driver told the children. "Bertie did splendidly, and because he got there in such good time, the doctor says that she should be home in no time." The children cheered, and Bertie grinned. "Well done, Bertie," Edward said proudly. "It's nice to know that some of us oldies are still useful, isn't it?"
"We've got an excursion tomorrow," Bertie's driver said one evening. Bertie was pleased. He spent most of his time running between Thomas's station and the villages, so a trip somewhere new made a nice change. "Are we taking children to the seaside?" he asked eagerly. "No," said his driver. "It's a group of climbers who want to go to the lake in the hills for their picnic, so make sure you rest your engine." But Bertie's engine wouldn't start when he awoke next day. His driver tried everything he could do to make Bertie's engine better, but it was no use. So, Bertie's friend Algy had to collect the climbers instead. Algy arrived on time and they all set off happily. But when they had done half their journey, Algy had to wait at some traffic lights. While they waited, Algy's engine stopped, and, try as he might, the driver could not start it again. "Would you mind helping me push Algy out of the way?" the driver asked the passengers. "We can't hold up the traffic like this." The passengers were pleased to help. They pushed as hard as they could, and in a cloud of white smoke, managed to get Algy started. Algy's driver went on very carefully, never letting the engine run slowly. Until at last, late but safe, they reached their destination. From a nearby house, the driver telephoned the garage to tell them what had happened. And the group of climbers ate their lunch. Then, while they climbed the hills and walked in the woods, Algy's driver tried to repair him. He worked hard all afternoon. Again and again he tried to start Algy's engine, but it was no use. Then, when there was only an hour to go before it was time to start for home, he went to the telephone once more.
"Sorry,"
said the man at the garage.
"Bertie is still not well, but we'll do what we can."
A little while later, tired after their day in the hills, the climbers returned to Algy the bus for their journey home. They were surprised to see Algy's driver still trying to make his bus start. "Shall we push you again?" they asked wearily. "Oh, I don't think that'll help now," said Algy's driver sadly. "I can't get him to work at all." "How long will it take for another bus to come and collect us?" the climbers asked anxiously.
"I'm afraid there isn't another bus,"
said Algy's driver.
"That's the trouble. Bertie's out of action as well. But I rang for help an hour ago."
At that very moment they heard the toot of a familiar horn in the distance, and soon who should appear around the corner but Bertie. "Hop in," he said cheerfully as he stopped beside Algy and the climbers. "Driver's mended me and now I feel fine. We'll have you home before you can say Bertie the Bus."
One night in the shed, Thomas, Percy and Toby were talking about buses. "It was partly buses that closed my old railway," said Toby sadly. "They took away Henrietta's passengers, you see. We had never once had an accident, but it made no difference. Everyone went by bus and no one travelled in Henrietta." "A bus called Algy tried that once with Doc and Oliver," Thomas remembered, "but it didn't work. He's a hen house now."
"Serves him right,"
put in Percy.
"He got too big for his bonnet."
I remember when Henrietta once scored over a bus, said Toby reminiscently. Tell us, urged Percy. It was one summer, Toby began. The road beside our line was busy. As well as cars going to the seaside, it was market day in the town, and the buses were full of people, either going shopping or coming home. But there was no one in poor Henrietta. The driver wanted to leave her behind for the last journey of the day, but I didn't. There's no one in her now, but you never know, I told him. Well, we started. And we hadn't gone very far when a bus full of people whizzed by much too fast. You'll come to a bad end, I shouldn't wonder, my driver remarked. He was right too. Before we got another mile, we came to a bend. Workmen had been mending gas pumps and had dug a deep hole in the road, just around the corner. They put warning signs up, but that bus must have been going so fast that he couldn't stop in time. By the time we got there, the signs were broken and the front wheels of the bus were hanging in mid-air above the hole. He couldn't move, and even if he could, his front end was so bent that his driver couldn't have steered him properly. Serves him right, said Percy. Well, we stopped nearby, Toby continued. The passengers from the bus stopped telling the driver how careless he'd been and came over to see us. Can you help? They asked. We want to go home, and that bus is no use. Can we travel in Henrietta, please? Of course you can, replied the driver. Climb in. Toby and I'll have you home in no time. So, Henrietta and I took the passengers home, finished Toby. It took a lot longer than no time, I'm afraid. I can't go very fast, but wasn't it lucky we took Henrietta? You never know, do you?